Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our briefing, The Tennessee River. Our panel today is the second installment in our new briefing series about resilient and healthy rivers. I sometimes get those mixed up, but it's resilient and healthy rivers. EESI is celebrating 40 years of advancing climate solutions through congressional education. We were founded by a bipartisan group of members of Congress, and since 1984, we've worked to provide science-based information about environmental, energy, and climate change topics to policymakers and the public. If you come to our briefings a lot, you always hear me say that we try to make our resources timely, relevant, accessible, and practical. And that's because we know that congressional staff are very busy, lots of stuff on their plates, and we put a lot of thought into our resources to always be science-based and ready when congressional staff need the information. That looks like this, lots of briefings. Sometimes we're online, sometimes we're on Capitol Hill, and we cover a lot of ground. Today, we're going to be talking about the Tennessee River, but other briefings we've held in the last couple months include budget and appropriations process, Sustainable Energy in America fact book, progress reports about the infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act, carbon dioxide removal, dam removal, nature-based solutions, and we've just published a ton of information about the key issues at stake at the international climate negotiations held last month in Baku, Azerbaijan. Everything we do is always available online at www.eesi.org. If you'd like to keep up with our work, the best way to do that is to subscribe to our biweekly newsletter, Climate Change Solutions. About 2 months ago, we initiated a briefing series to examine issues impacting U.S. rivers and the communities situated along them. That first briefing was about the mighty Mississippi River, and you can watch it online at www.eesi.org. This series is, in some ways, a continuation of another set of briefings from a few years ago about regional coastal resilience. Those 16 briefings, as well as a comprehensive report of the findings and policy ideas presented during the briefings, are available, just like everything else we do, on our website. The experiences of coastal communities are very important to understand, and our report helped congressional staff better grasp the challenges those communities face. But we knew at the time, and we know now, that we would need to revisit resilience in a comprehensive way with a new briefing series dedicated to riverine communities. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Following the Mississippi and the Tennessee, we will look at the Columbia River on January 15th. And in fact, you can already RSVP for that briefing if you like, and there'll be many, many more briefings on rivers over the course of 2025. The Tennessee River winds a scenic path through Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, and Kentucky, and it is known as one of the most biodiverse places on the entire continent. But the communities in the Tennessee River watershed face issues like biodiversity loss and pollution from forever chemicals and plastics, and our panelists today will help us understand the role of federal policies in improving the health of the river, improving the health of the inhabitants who are proud to live and work on its banks, and the health of all the critters who call the Tennessee River and its watershed home. If you like what you're hearing today, we will provide a link to a survey. The link will come up in just a moment. If you have 2 minutes and you'd like to take our survey, that would be great. If you want to wait till the end of the briefing, we'll put the link back up and you can take the survey then. But we really appreciate everyone taking a few moments to share your feedback, and we read every response. We're always looking for ways to get better. We have 3 amazing panelists, and we will also have time for questions. And for folks in our online audience today, you can submit questions by emailing us at that's ASK, at eesi.org, or you can tweet at us at EESI Online. Try to follow us on social media at EESI Online, and we're going to be doing real-time coverage on our Instagram story and X. The first of our 3 speakers today is Bernie Kuhajda. Bernie is an aquatic conservation biologist at the Tennessee Aquarium, where he's worked since 2012. Before that, Bernie spent 25 years at the University of Alabama, where he managed a museum collection of 1 million specimens of preserved fishes from all around the world. Though his studies of freshwater fishes and other aquatic organisms have taken him around the United States, Mexico, and Central Asia, Bernie's particular expertise is surveying and monitoring threatened and endangered species from aquatic systems in the southeast. He serves on multiple U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service recovery teams and groups for species at risk, and he's working with the U.S. Department of Agriculture and farmers to implement best management practices on agricultural lands to improve water quality. Bernie, welcome to the briefing today. I'm really looking forward to your slides.
Hey, it's great to be here. I'm really looking forward to letting you all know about the amazing aquatic biodiversity in the Tennessee River. Next slide. So freshwater is life, not only for humans. We all need fresh water to survive, but for a quarter of our vertebrate animals and a whole host of our invertebrates, like this cute little crawdad right here. But it's just a fraction of the water on the Earth's surface, and it is an extremely fragile ecosystem. But I want to highlight at first how amazing it is. Next. In the United States, the greatest aquatic biodiversity is in the Southeast. That's fishes, mussels, snails, crawdads, turtles, salamanders, a whole bunch of other creatures. Next. But it's not evenly distributed across the Southeast. The Tennessee Aquarium did a study with the University of Georgia a couple years ago, and we looked at 290 watersheds across the Southeast and looked at the richness, imperilment, and how narrow range that crawdads, mussels, and fishes had in each of these watersheds. Next. And the three that really stand out are the Tennessee River, what we're talking about today, the Cumberland River to the north, and the Mobile Basin to the south. And just to drive home the immense amount of freshwater aquatic biodiversity packed in here, you've got over 400 species of freshwater fishes, which is almost half the diversity in the US and Canada in 1.4% of the area. Next. So it's just really amazing. And the Tennessee River has 4 of these tributaries that are the best out of the 290. And out of the top 30, 14 are found in the Tennessee River. So this is really an extraordinarily rich river. It's nowhere else in the United States will you find this kind of aquatic biodiversity. Next. So we got 263 species here, including this cute hogsucker that is quite kissable. It's good luck if you kiss them. Next. We have fishes way up from the Smoky Mountains, next, all the way down to the valleys where you get just all these different kinds of minnows and shiners and chubs. Next. You have tangerine darters. They're one of the 58 species that's found nowhere else on the world except the Tennessee River. Next. We also have 16 species of fishes that are federally listed, and this is the very colorful and amazing laurel dace, and I'll be talking about it a little later. Next. We have the second largest salamander in the world, hellbenders, as well as 50 other species of salamanders in the Tennessee River watershed. Next. We have 125 different kinds of mussels. These freshwater mussels, they filter our water for us, and they produce these amazing lures to trick fish. And I'll get into that a little later. Next. And crawdads, who doesn't love crawdads? They are amazing. There's 75 different kinds of crawdads or mud bugs in the Tennessee River. It truly is amazing. Next. So why do we have all this incredible biodiversity in the Tennessee River? Well, first of all, we have water. New Mexico, they've got 44 freshwater fishes. The Tennessee River, 263. So you need a lot of water to have a lot of aquatic biodiversity. Next. But it really comes down in part to the geology. The eastern United States is rich. We've got 6 different major kinds of rocks. The fancy name is physiographic provinces. Next. And they all come together fairly close together here in the Southeast. And this is another reason why our aquatic biodiversity is so rich. Next. Because most of the Tennessee River is in the state of Tennessee, I will give you an example here. These are the 5 physiographic provinces in the state of Tennessee. From the coastal plain with those slow-flowing, sandy rivers that you find around Memphis, all the way up to the Smoky Mountains, the Blue Ridge, on the eastern part of the state. Next. And each one of these major physiographic provinces, they've got sub-provinces, slightly different kind of rocks within the coastal plain, within the Blue Ridge, within the Highland Rim. And Some species of fishes stick to this geology like glue because it tastes and smells and feels like home, and that's where they stay. Next. So just quickly, as far as I know, the Tennessee River is the only river in the United States that flows through 5 different physiographic provinces. It starts on the coastal plain in Kentucky, continues as you move upstream into Tennessee on the coastal plain and the Highland Rim. It flows down into Alabama on the Highland Rim. It carves through the Cumberland Plateau. Next. It comes back into Tennessee, out of the Cumberland Plateau, into the extremely diverse Valley and Ridge, and then the headwaters are up in the Smoky Mountains on the Blue Ridge. And each one of those different kinds of rocks, you get different kinds of fishes, crawdads, mussels, and snails. Next. So when we think of this amazing aquatic biodiversity we think about stream fishes and river fishes, but there's a whole nother group of aquatic organisms. Next. There are a lot of karst areas in the United States, and this is areas with soft rock like limestone that erode very easily. Next. And what do you get in these karst areas? You get springs and caves, and there's a lot of them here in the Southeast. Next. And you get amazing fishes, cave crawdads, cave shrimps in these really unique systems. And the Tennessee River has a large number of these. My favorite, next, is the Alabama cavefish. It's found in a single cave in northwest Alabama, outside of Florence, Alabama. The young ones have a duckbill platypus face. The big ones have a big old mouth. And I've been studying these guys for 30 years, and they are amazing. Next. All right, so let's go to the second big reason. We never had glaciers in the Southeast. During the Pleistocene Glacier Age, which started about 2.5 million years ago and just ended 20,000 years ago, we sometimes had over a mile thick sheet of ice sitting on the northern part of our continent, all the way down to southern Illinois and southern Indiana. And it really altered all of the rivers and all the aquatic habitat. Luckily, the Southeast, they never made them here, but it did alter our rivers somewhat. So I'll go into that a little bit next. So before the Ice Age, this is what our rivers in eastern and central United States looked like. They were totally different from what they are today. There was no Ohio River. The Mississippi River looked way different than it looked before. There was a river that flowed through the Midwest that's no longer there. The glaciers obliterated it. Next. And the Tennessee River was just a small little isolated river along with a major tributary, the Duck River, and we don't even know where it drained to. There wasn't even an Ohio River yet for it to drain into. Next. And then right next to it was the Appalachian River. It flowed on the west side of the Smoky Mountains down through Alabama into the Gulf of Mexico. Well, a funny thing happened on the way to present day. The old Tennessee River eroded through the Cumberland Plateau, and right out my window here at Walden Gap, it eroded into the base of that Appalachian River and captured it. Next. So now we have the Tennessee River that used to be the Upper Appalachian River and the old Tennessee and Duck River. And that's why another reason why we have such great aquatic biodiversity. You had 2 separate water bodies separated for millions and millions of years. And just to give you a point of reference, most of our freshwater fishes are anywhere from 1 to 5 million years old. So a lot of these species were around before the glaciers came. Next. So we have all these amazing animals, these breeding striped shiners. Next. These big, huge buffalo suckers that just carp at the bottom of streams with eggs. Next. We have cute little log perch that use that little nose to flip over rocks and eat the little aquatic insects underneath the rocks. Next. And then these freshwater mussels, they create these lures because their babies have to parasitize, have to attach to the gills of fishes for them to transform from a little larval mussel to a tiny juvenile mussel that drops into the sand and starts growing. And so we just have all these different species forming this wonderful mosaic of aquatic ecosystems spread throughout the Southeast and especially right here in the Tennessee River. Next. And that is why the Southeastern aquatic biodiversity rocks. There you go. That's it. All right. So now let me talk about a species that I was actually out in the field working with today. Next. This is the federally endangered laurel dace. When I started working here at the Conservation Institute, it was found in 5 streams. It's now down to 2. This is what a laurel dace stream up on the Cumberland Plateau should look like, a mountain stream. Next. This is what all the streams where it used to be found look like. The forests up on the Cumberland Plateau in many places have been replaced by vegetable crops. And I'm a vegetarian, so I love me vegetables. But when you plant vegetables, the row of vegetables has plastic on it. So half the field is an impervious surface. So when it rains 2 inches, 4 inches of rainwater rush down those inner rows, carrying all that sediment and dump them into these mountain streams. Next. And not only do the laurel dace have that issue, they've got hanging culverts that separate their populations. They've got invasive bass and bluegill and green sunfish that aren't native. They escape from farm ponds, and they're starting to get disease from all the stressors. Next. And this year, an extreme drought hit, and we rescued 300 that are now in human care here and in a federal hatchery. Next. So we have these fishes here. We're not sure what to do. Part of why I was out this morning is to see how many fishes are left in these streams. Do we release these 300 that we saved back in August and September? Do we propagate them? We're still developing that. Next. But rather than just wringing our hands about all of these sediments in the stream, we actually, the Tennessee Aquarium is the lead, along with a whole bunch of partners, got a regional conservation partnership program with the Department of Agriculture and the Natural Resources Conservation Service. Through the 2018 Farm Bill, we were awarded $10 million to get on the ground voluntarily by farmers to help keep soil on their fields and out of the streams, increasing their productivity and protecting the laurel dace. Next. And some of these better management practices are cover crops during the winter, and then crimping those cover crops and just planting them, and your whole field is mulched. Protecting the waterways with vegetated buffers, maybe leaving grass in those inner rows so not so much dirt doesn't wash off those vegetable fields. Next. And keeping the cows out of streams, giving them alternative water supplies, and giving them rotational grazing. You end up with fatter cows and less runoff from the pastures. Next. One success story is the lake sturgeon. They completely disappeared from the Tennessee, Cumberland, and Mobile Basin rivers back in the 1970s. Next. But the Clean Water Act in 1972 has really cleaned up our big rivers. They're cleaner than they've been in 150 years. Next. And TVA has improved the water quality below their dams with minimum flow, putting oxygen in there. So that's really improved the health of the Tennessee River proper. Next. So we raise, along with other hatcheries, small little lake sturgeon. We get about a ½ an inch long. Next. Up to about 6 to 9 inches. Next. And we release them with the public in the late summer or fall. Next. And the kids are cute, but I think the sturgeon are cuter. Next. And this has been a very successful program. It's been going on for 24 years, and we're hoping to see spawning soon. Next. Then the last slide I'll leave you with is we have all the greatest aquatic biodiversity in North America right here, and we get very little federal funding. I went through 5 years of reports on how much the federal and state agencies spend on threatened and endangered fishes in the United States. For every dollar spent in the Southeast, there's $46 spent outside the Southeast. Another way to look at it, we have almost a third of the threatened and endangered species of fishes. We get 0.9% of the funding. So we really need some more conservation dollars in the Tennessee River and the Southeast. And yeah, thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Bernie. That was great. And Bernie, your slides are a great reminder that all of the presentation materials from today will be posted on the briefing webpage. So you can visit us online at www.eesi.org and look it up. If you want to go back and revisit some of Bernie's, like, is this really a cute fish statements, you can. And come to your own conclusions, to each his own. But thanks, Bernie. That was a great presentation. That brings us to, it's a very rainy day. It just got very loud and rainy here in outside of DC. Speaking of water, rivers, our next panelist is Martin Knoll. Martin is a professor of geology and hydrology and the chair of the Department of Earth and Environmental Systems at Sewanee, I think I got that right, the University of the South. Martin's research interests include surface and groundwater quality and dynamics in the southeastern United States, with a special emphasis on heavy metals and microplastics. Martin teaches courses in hydrology, paleoecology, and climate change of the past, and conducted a swimming survey of the Tennessee River's water quality. Martin, welcome to the briefing today. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you for inviting me. Very happy to be here. So back in 2017, my colleague Andreas Spath, who's a water chemist from Germany, he and I conducted an extensive water quality survey of the entire 652-mile length of the Tennessee River, starting above Knoxville and working our way all the way down to the end of the river in Paducah, Kentucky, at the confluence with the Ohio River. And the way we did that is that we took a pontoon boat downstream. I was on that pontoon boat with students collecting water samples on a daily basis, doing all kinds of environmental measurements of the water. And Andreas was swimming alongside us, and he swam the entire length of the river. It took us 34 days. Why did we do that? Because the main intent of that event that we called the Tennis Swim was to get the public interested in water quality and why clean water is important. If you put a couple scientists on a boat, send them downstream, and they take water samples, well, that's not that interesting, maybe just to other academics. But if you put a crazy professor in the water and he's setting a world record, which he did for swimming the whole thing, swimming 20 miles a day, then you get some public interest, and it worked really well. So as we floated downstream, we took a look at hundreds of different man-made chemicals that might be in the river, various types of pharmaceuticals, flame retardants, forever chemicals that were mentioned earlier, heavy metals, herbicides and pesticides, and also microplastics. So we looked at a whole suite of different potential contaminants in the river. A couple of years prior to that Tennis Swim, we had done the exact same study on the Rhine River in Europe, and using the exact same analytical techniques, looking at the exact same pollutants, including microplastics. So now we had this really unique ability to compare water quality in two of the great rivers of the world, one in Europe and one here in the United States. The two rivers are remarkably similar in terms of their length, how much water passes through them, those kind of things. The big difference between the two rivers is the number of people that live in the watersheds of each river. So in the Tennessee River watershed, we've got about 5 million people living here. In the Rhine River watershed, it's 10 times that many, it's 50 million people. So based on that alone, one would expect that the Rhine River should be much more polluted than the Tennessee River. More people means more pollution. So what did we find in the Tennessee River? Well, the bottom line is that the river, based on lots of different environmental parameters, seems to be pretty darn clean, with a couple of major exceptions. And so we did find, a whole host of man-made chemicals. We found lots of different types of pharmaceuticals, for instance, things like painkillers, tramadol, which is a synthetic opioid, diclofenac, it's another painkiller, beta blockers, things like metoprolol, cetoprolol, things like that, anti-seizure medications, antipsychotics, things of that nature, medicines that we all take. They just don't get broken down by the human body very well, and they certainly don't get broken down by sewage treatment plants. So they end up back in the waterways, in this case, the Tennessee River. We found flame retardants, components to sunscreen lotion, caffeine, artificial sweeteners, a whole basket of different herbicides and pesticides, things like atrazine, which is a row crop herbicide that's commonly used. So we did find all those in lower concentrations than what you find in the Rhine, and that makes sense. Fewer people, you'd expect fewer pharmaceuticals in the Tennessee River. Other things looked really good. Dissolved oxygen, temperature, biological oxygen demand, this kind of standard sort of environmental parameters that one tends to measure in rivers, they all look really good. Even nitrates and phosphates, fertilizers were at pretty low levels. But there were two areas of concern. And one chemical that we did find, a man-made chemical that was at levels much higher than in the Rhine, were perfluorinated compounds, the PFAS compounds, which are referred to as forever chemicals very often because once they're manufactured, and they're not natural, they're only produced by humans, once they enter in the environment, they basically don't break down. They stick around for a long time. And we found them at levels that were about 10 times higher in the Tennessee River than in the Rhine River. Okay, and that includes a basket of 7 or 8 different types of PFAS chemicals. And these are chemicals that are associated with stain resistancy in fabrics or Teflon production. And in terms of humans and also aquatic life, they're associated with endocrine disruptions. So they're of great concern today. So that is one area of concern, are these PFAS chemicals in the Tennessee River. The other one, the other area of concern would be with the microplastics. Microplastics are exactly what they sound like. They're small pieces of plastic, less than 5 millimeters maximum diameter. And these are pieces of plastic that are broken down from bigger pieces of plastic. They end up in our waterways and they move on downstream. So we were quite shocked when we analyzed the water in many places all the way down the river that we consistently got very high values of microplastic particles suspended in the water. And in fact, these were some of the highest values ever measured in any river anywhere on planet Earth. So on average, we were finding 16,000 microplastic particles per cubic meter of water. A cubic meter of water is 1,000 liters, okay? If you compare that to the Rhine River, which has got so many more inhabitants in the watersheds, there you only find 200 particles in that same size range we're looking at per cubic meter of water. So there's a huge difference between the Rhine and the Tennessee in that regard. And if we look at this first slide that we see posted here, that's been here a while next to me, this is just one of those water samples. And here we had over 17,000 particles in this 1,000 liters of water that were sampled. But what this diagram shows are the different polymer types of plastic that we found in this 1,000 liter sample. And the main thing to see here is that the majority of plastic is this one type. It's pretty much takes up half the diagram on the right, PE. That's polyethylene. And what is polyethylene? What do we use it for? Where does it come from? Polyethylene is what all those grocery bags that we all use are made from. The grocery bags that you get at, all the grocery stores, the big box stores, that's what they're made out of. Food wrap, lightweight food wrap, the crinkly stuff, that's polyethylene. Okay, so that diagram is very telling. And maybe go to the next slide, please. So here you see a view of the Tennessee River coming in on the right, where it meets the Ohio River. This is the official end of the Tennessee in Paducah, Kentucky. And if you do the math, the amount of plastic particles in the Tennessee per cubic meter, and the rate of flow and how much water is coming out, into the Ohio, it means that there are 30-something million particles of plastic entering into the Ohio River every second from the Tennessee. And of course, things don't stop there. The Ohio has got its own microplastic load, and this all continues into the Mississippi and ultimately into the Gulf of Mexico, into our oceans. Okay, so that is a big issue. Why do we worry so much about microplastics? What's the big deal with plastic? Well, the problem is little bits of plastic, once they're in a river environment where you've got these toxins that I talked about earlier that we did find, pharmaceuticals, pesticides, PFAS, heavy metals, that those toxins like to stick, like to adhere to the surfaces of the microplastic particles. So here's a model. Just think of this blue sphere as an enlargement of a microplastic particle bobbing along in the Tennessee River. These little orange dots then represent any number of toxins that we talked about that we know are present in the river because we found them, pharmaceuticals, heavy metals, pesticides, and so forth. So these things stick to the microplastic particles. And if these microplastic particles get into the drinking water system, and we know they do in many places because we find microplastics in tap water, then if you drink that water, you have then swallowed a little Trojan horse that might release all these extra little toxins into your body. So the microplastics can concentrate these toxins on their surfaces and then in the human body. And of course, there are tens of thousands of people living along the Tennessee River that use the river for drinking water sources, in Knoxville, Chattanooga, Huntsville, and a lot of smaller municipalities in between. And as the biologist here can also attest, these particles represent an issue for aquatic life, fish and invertebrates, so forth. So that's the problem with microplastics. And if we go to the next slide, the question that just begs to be answered is, why do we have so much plastic in the Tennessee River? And why does the Rhine River, with so many more people living in this watershed, have so few microplastic particles? I don't know the answer to that, but you just have to believe, and I believe strongly, that littering is part of the issue. So in this slide, the two right-hand photos, you can see two tributaries of the Tennessee River, one in Knoxville, Tennessee, and one in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And this is just a raft of plastic debris. This is what you can see. What you can't see, of course, is under the water, floating along and bouncing along the bottom. And on the left is a more rural scene. We're not dealing with an urban area here. This is where I live on the Cumberland Plateau. Typical roadside scene, lots of plastic litter. So this is all going to make its way down into the Tennessee River, ultimately breaking down into microplastic particles as it moves down there. This is not a scene that you see in Northern Europe, in the watershed of the Rhine River. Other parts of Europe maybe, but certainly not where the Rhine flows. And so I think that littering is a big part of the problem. Why don't people litter in Northern Europe? That's an interesting question. There certainly are much more robust plastic recycling programs than in the southeastern United States. There are bottle bills. You take bottles to the grocery store in Germany, you get money back. There's also a difference in the cultural mindset, I would say, in both Northern Europe and the southeastern United States. And that may be the more difficult place to make a change, but one could certainly institute more robust recycling programs and bottle bills to help keep plastic out of the waterways. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin, for your presentation. You mentioned PFAS. That is something that is on the minds of many congressional staff. And we published an issue brief, which is sort of a longer discussion of PFAS. And that was published a couple months ago, and that's available online. So for congressional staff in our audience today, if you or your boss have questions about PFAS, it's a really great resource, and I encourage you to check it out. And if you want to learn more, you're welcome to reach out to one of us here at EESI, and I will be happy to come either meet with you or have a call, and we can help answer questions or find extra information if you need it. But thanks, Martin. That was a great presentation. Kind of a bummer presentation in some ways, but it was a great presentation. That brings us to Bo Baxter. Bo is the director of Conservation Fisheries, Inc. Conservation Fisheries is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to the preservation of aquatic biodiversity in our streams and rivers. Bo has worked at Conservation Fisheries for about 15 years, and today he can usually be found coordinating work with partners, creating plans to improve efficiency, or discovering systems that enable better data collection and recording of significant data. Bo, thank you for joining us at our briefing today. I'll look forward to your presentation.
Yes, thanks for having me. It's great to talk about a river system that I've lived my whole life in and dedicated my career to protecting. Hopefully this will be a little bit more of a positive, less of a bummer story. So if you go to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about the history of conservation fisheries. We started as a graduate student project at the University of Tennessee. Our founders, J.R. Shute and Pat Rakes, were students at the time. And back in 1957 in Abrams Creek in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, the National Park Service poisoned out dozens of miles of stream in an effort to establish a trophy trout fishery. When they poisoned out that stream, they also eliminated 2 native species. These are miniature mad toms. I can't see my fingers, maybe 3 or 4 inches long, called the smoky mad tom and the elephant mad tom. The people that did this work were doing what was best fisheries science at the time. It was simply ill-informed. The concepts of biodiversity, community ecology hadn't been developed at the time. Looking through museum specimens in 1969, several years after this happened, a researcher found specimens of the smoky mad tom, which was a species unknown to science. He described it as the smoky mad tom and declared it extinct after doing some cursory looking for it in areas in Abrams Creek and around Abrams Creek. Fast forward to the 1980s, and this animal was rediscovered in nearby Citico Creek. The first idea to restore Abrams Creek was to transplant individuals from Citico Creek population that was rediscovered to Abrams Creek to restore the fish. They found 3 fish the first year, so direct transplant was not going to be the way to get it done. So JR and Pat received this project and started raising these fish in a laboratory setting and reintroducing them back into Abrams Creek. Along the way, they discovered a population of yellowfin mad tom in Citico Creek. They were also part of this reintroduction program. And now, about 40 years later, both of these species are reestablished in that stream, in numerous other streams, the Tellico River, North Fork Holston River, and the yellowfin mad tom is right on the brink of being removed from the endangered species list. So that's kind of our goal at Conservation Fisheries, is to restore and recover these species so that human intervention isn't necessary. Next slide, please. So these are our founders, Pat and JR, in our facility. We're a really small operation. We work out of about a 5,200 square foot warehouse. Right now, we're working with 17 species of native freshwater fish. And all of these are those small, threatened, or endangered species that the big national and state fish hatcheries just don't have the expertise or the time to work with. Over the years, we've worked with 86 species of freshwater fish, including about 30 of those threatened and endangered species that are found throughout the US. And we've worked with virtually all of the 16 that are found in Tennessee. What's unique about Conservation Fisheries is that we're a private organization. We're a nonprofit. And being a nonprofit, that has some advantages and some disadvantages. I guess the primary one being funding. Like Bernie was saying, most of our money is federal dollars that either come directly from the service or pass-through dollars that come from the feds to the states and then to individual species projects like at Conservation Fisheries. One of the great things about being a nonprofit is that we're able to stay focused on our mission. We started protecting these species 40 years ago. We're still doing that job and we intend to do it for the next 40 years. So despite changes in funding formulas, interest in what the states and the feds are doing, we're able to keep that mission going of preserving this amazing resource. Next slide, please. So this is CFI today. That picture before was from about 15 years ago. We have kind of leaned into the nonprofit side of our work. And these rack systems are brighter and cleaner. We've replaced a lot of the equipment in our facility through grants and donations from foundations. So there's a huge interest in the general public and in foundations to support the kind of work we do and other conservation work. But linking those private foundations to federal dollars as a match can sometimes be the biggest struggle that we run into when we're operating a nonprofit like Conservation Fisheries. Next slide, please. So number-wise, I said we've worked with 86 species since 1986. These are a few of those species that we've worked with. we've released almost 300,000 animals in those nearly 40 years of work. I think Bernie mentioned that they released 300,000 sturgeon in only 20 years. These fish don't produce as many young. You'll have nests that range from 30 to maybe in a big Mad Tom 150 eggs. So we're working with really, really fragile, really, really delicate animals. So we're proud of 300,000 in 40 years. It's not what you would see in a trout hatchery or with sturgeon, but it's taken a lot of effort from a lot of people to hit that number. Next, please. So the three pillars of what conservation fisheries do, first pillar is starting with conservation. That's how we got started, saving fish, restoring them back into the landscape where they belong, or augmenting populations that are struggling so they don't decline and cause problems. The Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, NEPA, Endangered Species Act, all of these foundational environmental laws have resulted in much better water quality throughout the Tennessee River system, as Bernie said. The water's cleaner than it's been in decades, and that gives conservation fisheries and organizations like ours the opportunity to come in and put fish back where they belong. The rivers have been cleaned up, the habitat's been restored. We can come in and put fish back and reestablish those populations. So we propagate fish in our hatchery, we reintroduce them to those streams. These reintroduction efforts can be quick, maybe 3 to 5 years for something like a Tennessee dace, or 40 years like the yellowfin mad tom and smoky mad tom. So reintroduction is a long-term process, and that's part of what we've been able to do as a nonprofit, is just keep chugging along year after year. We'll monitor those populations and make sure they're taking, and we'll keep working with them if they need it. One of the things that we end up doing a lot is keeping assurance colonies or ARC colonies for animals that are in so much trouble in the wild that they can't survive. This is a spring pygmy sunfish here. The prior spring's population of this fish has been wiped out numerous times, and we keep some of the last ones that were collected from that spring until the habitat's recovered and we can put them back. Next. So there's an environmental sensitivity going on. These guys are the canaries in the coal mine. Bernie talked about freshwater mussels, salamanders, snails. All of the rare species have some sort of sensitivity, something particular that makes them subject to being wiped out, and that can be chemicals. One of the biggest impacts now is sedimentation. Anything that disturbs the ground, like the farming that was happening where the laurel dace live, results in dirt getting into the soil, or sorry, dirt getting into the streams. Disturbance is another major factor. On the right here are an egg mass and some young, we call them egg yolk larvae, of the smoky mad tom. These guys nest under rocks in the streams. People love to pile up rocks and make little cairns. When they move those rocks, expose that nest, these guys are gone. They've lost the whole production of that pair of fish for the year. So people getting in and disturbing the streams can be a problem. Next. One particular instance is toxicity. So these are the really most sensitive animals in the stream. A lot of compounds are tested against fathead minnow or some other common aquatic species that may not be particularly sensitive. We worked with blue shiners, and EPA did toxicity testing on them and found them particularly sensitive to chlorine compounds, copper, and these PFAS, the forever chemicals. So they were orders of magnitude more sensitive than what the environmental standards had been set, and that's the reason that these fish were declining in some of these streams. Chlorine and copper were used as the final stage algae control and bacteriological sterilization at a water treatment plant. The plant changed how they do that. They now use ozone instead of chlorine, and they don't use copper in their wells, and these fish have kind of bounced back in some of those areas. But without us being able to produce young in our hatchery for testing, we never would have known these things. Next. Second pillar of conservation fisheries is education. Doing events like this, reaching out to stream schools and getting kids in the creek to see the amazing animals that live in these rivers. If people don't know about a resource, they're not going to care about a resource. And one thing that we really stress is education, education, education. Show people what's in the stream in their backyard, and they'll begin to care about it. Next, please. And then the last one is connection. I said conservation fisheries kind of comes in at the end of a restoration effort. It takes work by the states, federal agencies, NRCS, local municipalities to clean up the environment. CFI is not in the job of habitat restoration. We're in the job of restoring species after a lot of other people have done that work. So it takes a huge coalition to recover a stream, and you have to build a community around that restoration because it can take decades. And we're talking about a global process. Animals, freshwater fish, mussels are endangered all across the world. And we are trying to work with partners in Asia and Africa, South America, to use some of the techniques that CFI has developed to help restore these species. Next. Fragmentation. Bernie's already talked about barriers to stream travel. TVA owns and operates 48 dams in the Tennessee Valley, and that's what they were mandated to do. They were to control flooding and restore the economy of the Southeast. They did a fantastic job of that in 1933. Since then, we've learned a lot more about the environment, and we've learned how fragmented these landscapes really are. There are 48 TVA dams, but there are also over 9,000 non-TVA dams. These are usually small mill dams or low head dams for water supply, but each one of those is a barrier to fish travel and fish movement, fish getting to each other to reproduce naturally. In addition to that, there are over 200,000 stream crossings, perched culverts, buried streams that go under roads. So there's a lot of connectivity problems with the streams in the Tennessee River system. And this is just the Tennessee River system. Imagine this magnified across all the water systems in the US. Next. So this is the TVA power service area. I'm going to talk about TVA a little bit in the context of being a former employee. I worked for TVA for 20 years in their environmental management team. I'm not talking for TVA, I'm talking about TVA. But TVA has gone from the snail darter days and fighting against environmental concerns to being really a proactive partner in a lot of this recovery work. Some parts of the river are forever changed. The main stem dams and reservoirs probably aren't going away, and have completely altered the natural riverine communities to reservoirs and tailwaters. But TVA has done a lot to improve the environment, beginning in the 1990s when they put in those measures that Bernie mentioned, minimum flows, oxygenation in some of the tailwaters. They've improved about 160 miles of river downstream of TVA dams to the point where they're supporting more of those natural communities. It's cold below those dams, so a lot of the native community has been replaced by trout fisheries, brown trout, rainbow trout, but TVA has been making improvements for years. And in 2024, I'm sorry, 2004, they did the reservoir operations study, which fundamentally altered how they operate the entire system, all 48 dams. So instead of focusing on keeping the recreational pool, the lake levels high as long as they can for boaters and fishers, they looked at providing a minimum flow through the system so the river behaved more like a river. And that's resulted in some profound changes for the better in the main stem of the Tennessee River. And then in 2021, TVA established, as far as I know, the first of its kind biodiversity policy, where they will consider impacts of TVA projects and TVA approvals on biodiversity, aquatic and terrestrial biodiversity. So despite the impacts that TVA has had over the years, they've also spent a lot of effort and money to mediate some of those impacts. And they've been a great partner for conservation fisheries. They've funded several of our restoration projects. They went so far as providing a backup power generator for our facility. So if we lose power from the local utility, we can keep all those animals alive and in the condition that they need. Next, please. I'm going to leave you with a pretty fish picture as we move into the question and answer session. This is actually not a Tennessee native, but it's a North American native. This is the candy darter from the New River in Virginia and West Virginia, just to illustrate what is living in our streams. These are gorgeous animals. You would imagine that being on a coral reef if you didn't know that it was a North American native freshwater fish. And it's just one of hundreds that have that same beauty. And if we teach people about that beauty and teach them how to protect it, they're going to do it. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Bo. That was great. Wanted to plug another one of our resources. Back in May, we did a briefing sort of specifically focused on dam removal and river restoration. And so we had CEO of American Rivers, CEO of National Hydropower Association, Representative Ann Custer from New Hampshire. So if you want to learn a little bit more about what dam removal and river restoration looks like and what it doesn't look like, what it is and what it isn't, and the types of dams that are actually involved, I would definitely check that briefing out. It was a really good one, and definitely one of those things that I wasn't really thinking about a whole lot before, but now I'm always looking to see if I can find old dams when I'm driving past rivers, being like, oh, that's a dam. I didn't realize that. But thank you, Bo. That was great. As Bo mentioned, we are going to transition into our Q&A, and we have what can only be described as a boatload of time for Q&A. So if there are people in our online audience who still have questions for us, you can go ahead and send us an email. And the email address is ask, that's ask@eesi.org. We've got some questions coming in, which is great. So we'll incorporate those into our discussion. But to kick us off, Bernie, I'd like to come back to you. You've all talked extensively about biodiversity, and all of you have mentioned species that I've never heard of before. Species that are, they live in maybe a couple different places, a couple different rivers. And I'm curious, the importance of those species and how sort of the survival of those species relates to the biodiversity of what you might think of as sort of the more charismatic creatures or critters, the big ones, the big mammals, the big, the charismatic megafauna that we all know of. What's the relationship between those smaller species and the ones that we might think about, and that might also get the more attention from maybe a more mainstream conservation audience?
So I mentioned there were 263 species of fishes in the Tennessee River. Most of the public have heard about 20 of them maybe, and most of them are either game fish or large fishes like the lake sturgeon. So the vast majority of our aquatic animals, even the vertebrates, even the fishes, the salamanders, they go unnoticed by the public, the mussels, the snails, the crawdads. But as I mentioned earlier, they all work together to basically clean our water. Every species is a building block in the foundation of that aquatic ecosystem. And every time you lose a species, you lose a building block, that ecosystem gets a little weaker, and now you have to pay more for drinking water. Now maybe you can't go paddleboarding and kayaking and swimming in that lake or that river. And now maybe you for certainly can't eat the fishes that you catch. So by keeping all of these amazing, tiny, non-charismatic species, they're charismatic to me, but not the general public, it helps out humans. And it's the natural heritage of the Southeast that we can retain for generations to come.
Martin, I'd like to give you a chance to comment as well, and then we'll hear from Bo.
That's really a bio question. I'm gonna defer onto Bo.
No, that's no problem. Yeah, I like to use the example of city services. When you lose a species, you're losing a function in the ecosystem. So if all the trash men in the city disappear, we immediately have a problem. Day one here in Knoxville, nobody's hauling off the trash. There are species that serve similar functions. The crayfish are shredding up dead animals, dead plant material. When you lose ecosystem services like that, it just moves up the chain to us humans. So preserving the littlest things, even if we don't understand the function, it's got to be important because it's an integral component of that community.
Martin, one of your slides, I think, no, excuse me, one of Bernie's slides showed sort of the effects of some drought in some areas that he's been studying. And I want to, we've moved up from maybe some of the smaller species to some of the bigger species, moving up even higher. How does climate change tie in to the future of the Tennessee River from the work that you're doing and the sort of effects of human industry on the river, and some of the sources of that industry are also contributing to, greenhouse gas emissions?
That's a great question. So one thing that we know in terms of climate change here in the Southeast is that many areas are receiving more and more rainfall. And that is something that climate models have been predicting for a while. Not only that, but the rain is coming down in more of a series of storm events, and those storm events are tending to be more intense. So a couple of years ago here in Sewanee, Tennessee, which is south central, south middle Tennessee, we had 100 inches of rain for that year. That's amazing. I never thought I'd live to see that kind of rain. Usually we average 65, 75 inches of rain a year. So when you have more storms, more rain coming down, and they're more intense, that means more runoff into streams and rivers. And if that's an urban area, you can imagine, you can just picture the scene in your mind's eye. That means more litter, more plastic, more things that have dripped out of automobiles like radiator fluid, hydrocarbons from gasoline, that kind of thing. More of that material, more pollutants being washed down into streams. So climate, I think, is driving that increase a little bit in those kind of pollutants, and also increases erosion, of course. And Bo was talking about the problem with siltation in streams, and that will only increase as we have more intense storms.
Bo, happy to give you a swing at this one too, and then we can hear from Bernie.
Oh yeah, this year we've seen both extremes. Bernie talked about doing a rescue for the Laurel dace due to drought. One of the fish that we've worked with our entire existence is the Barron's top minnow, and we had to go again rescue that population of Barron's top minnow from the plateau because the springs it relies on were drying out. The second severe drought incident this year in that area. Before it was on a frequency of maybe 5 years or 10 years drought. So this year we've seen drought problems. On the other hand, we've seen the results of Hurricane Helene in Western North Carolina and the French Rod, Nolichucky rivers, the Pigeon River. We had to pull the plug on some of our restoration efforts because of what happened in those rivers. Floods happen. Floods of normal size happen fairly routinely, and the fish and the animals are adapted to it. This was an unprecedented event, and the whole river has changed its channel in lots of areas. All the habitat, all the riparian habitat that these animals rely on is simply gone or displaced. So we've seen catastrophic excess rain and catastrophic lack of rain in the valley in the same year.
And Bernie?
And what makes these droughts even worse is in urban settings, we have these impervious surfaces that don't let the water go into the ground. And so you don't have that natural recharge into the streams. And even with poor agricultural practices, if you, during our west part of the season, the winter and early spring, if you leave that field bare dirt, that first heavy rain creates a hard layer, and all the rest of the rain runs off of that field into the streams. You don't get it soaking into the groundwater, so when there is a drought, it can slowly recharge that stream. If you plant a cover crop, that vegetation stops the water from flowing off, it sinks into the ground. In the same way, if you put grass in those inner rows in vegetable fields, yeah, half the field is an impervious surface, but now that water, instead of rushing and carrying all that dirt, that grass in the inner row slows down the water, the dirt stays put, the crops are healthier, they have more water and more healthy soil, and you have more water in the ground to recharge those streams when you have 2 or 3 months of no rain.
Yep. Back to the title of this talk, it's about resilience. That's a resilient system. And if you alter the system and make it unnatural, it loses that natural resiliency and you have problems.
So this question is this question came in and I think it's pretty interesting. Bo, your presentation, you talked a little bit about TVA. Bernie, I know you mentioned NRCS, and Martin, I think you mentioned a couple other groups, but on this one, any of you can go first if you'd like, but curious about what you're seeing in terms of partnerships beyond the ones that were mentioned. Are there sort of key groups of academic institutions? Are there private sector partners? Are there interesting things happening at the state or the local, state, federal nexus that hasn't come up that you'd like to mention as positive examples about how different constituencies are working together to clean up and conserve the Tennessee River?
Yeah, I can jump on that real quickly. For our Regional Conservation Partnership Program with NRCS, we have 17 different partners, including state and federal agencies, a lot of land trusts that work with farmers to keep farms and not subdivisions. The Fish and Wildlife had a shortfall of what we need to do to try to keep the laurel dace from literally going extinct in the next year or two. And so the aquarium was able to raise money, and we had some significant contributions from private corporations and private individuals. So it really does take a village from the nonprofits and state and government agencies all the way up to businesses and individual people. We all need to work together to keep the wonderful things we have and try to restore what we've lost.
I think that's correct. It's easy for many different types of groups to rally around the concept of clean water. In the tennis swim that we did in 2017 was expensive, and we had support from lots of different groups, very generous support from TVA, by the way, but also private foundations, lots of beer breweries, ones in Germany, of course, but also a Sweetwater Brewery out of Atlanta. So lots of people, are interested in clean water.
Yeah, and there's some big basin-wide initiatives. The Tennessee River Basin Network, Bernie and I are part of that. That is a group of organizations that includes state and federal partners, land conservancies, neighborhood associations have showed up to talk about water quality issues in their neighborhoods. So there are a lot of people looking at the river more holistically, which is a great change over the way we've been dealing with water quality issues in the past.
And then the University of Tennessee has Tennessee River Line, where they're trying to get people in touch with the river by creating blueways and public access to the river so everyone can appreciate what's right in their backyard.
Cool. So speaking of communities engaging, I'm curious, and this is another question that's come in. Examples of, so you all live in the Tennessee River watershed. Curious if you have any examples that you can share about how communities are what communities are doing. What's the relationship between communities living and working in the watershed and the different types of biodiversity work that you all are trying to accomplish? And again, this one's open to anybody, and I'll let you all go at it.
Yeah. I'll follow up with Bernie mentioning the Tennessee River Line. That's designed to engage those communities. It's kind of starting with river use and recreation, water quality as it relates to humans. But a lot of us that are interested in biodiversity are getting into that coalition to try to bring the biodiversity issues kind of to the front, because all of those river communities have something in the river next to their community that's biologically important. So we need to get them engaged and interested in protecting it.
I have a great example, Spring City, Tennessee, which is just east of Walden Ridge, which is a finger of the Cumberland Plateau where laurel dace live. They've been having increasing flooding issues in their community as the forests get changed to agriculture up on the Cumberland Plateau. And the reservoir, Chickamauga Reservoir, that's right there, it's a world-class bass fisheries. So here you have what's happening up on a plateau and to the laurel dace affecting the community and a reservoir and bass fishing. Well, Spring City is working with us to have a race to save the Laurel Dace Day next year on the 17th of May with a 5K run, and just highlighting what folks in their backyard doing agriculture, timber resources, construction can do to minimize flooding in communities, keep reservoirs clean for bass fisheries, and save the amazing Laurel Dace. And it's this community has just rallied around that fish way up on the ridge, just west of them.
And these practice. Oh, go ahead, Martin.
I was gonna say, we have a lot of spelunkers in this area, cavers,
Oh, yeah.
and they're an interesting group, and they're very interested in clean water, the water they see going through the karst systems, the caves. So they institute lots of cave cleanups, sinkhole cleanups, which are, of course, the conduit to the underground. And so we see more and more of that going on. Just another example of a group involved.
Go ahead, Bo.
I was just going to say that part of the communication to these communities and to the farmers is best practices are typically not expensive, not hard to apply. The farmers want their soil to remain in the field. We want their soil to remain in the field. We're working toward the same goal. So just educating and informing folks about those practices goes a long way.
And so, Bernie, is this going to be called the Amazing Dace? Is it like a 5K dace? Is there a wordplay? You can use any of these.
The race to save the Laurel Dace.
The race to save the dace.
And it's going to be Laurel Dace Days in Spring
I
City.
like that. Yeah, I feel like there's some good graphic design options with that too, like little shoes on the back fins or something.
Well, we're also getting a mascot, a Laurel Dace mascot that someone will wear and run around. So yeah, we'll even have a Laurel Dace there.
That's cool. That's very cool. This question just came in, and it came in from an organization that's actually been mentioned a couple times. I will leave it unnamed just in case, but it's kind of interesting. Martin, it's specifically directed to you, but I have kind of a follow-up that I might open up to the group. But the specific question is, are there ongoing measurements of current microplastic levels with data accessible to the public? And there's a follow-up, two follow-ups. Do we have any metrics for the results of different litter or microplastic mitigation? And the second follow-up is, are there any methods that are having a positive increase that we should do more of?
So there's no regular monitoring of microplastics in the Tennessee River that I know of. And so things like our trip down the river was a one-off, right? And so when you sample that way, that's a snapshot in time. So unfortunately, there is not a regular sampling program that I know of anywhere along the Tennessee River system. It's not easy to collect the samples, and it really is difficult to separate them from the sediment, the plastic particles. So it's not just a case of draining the water off and looking under a microscope. There's a lot more to it than that. There are a lot of things that look like microplastics that are not, that are organic. And so it's quite an involved process to prepare the samples and then to analyze them. So, but there are more and more people interested in microplastics. So a lot of people at the University of Tennessee and University of Tennessee, Chattanooga, other places too, including Sewanee, that are looking at microplastics in all kinds of water systems. And the one thing we know now about microplastics is that they're everywhere, and you can hardly get away from that information in the daily news, right, that we consume. We see that they're everywhere, but there is no regular monitoring in our river system. We see these high levels in there. People ask, and I think this was part of the question, what can we do about that? It's not worth trying to clean up what's in there. That's an impossible task. Sure, it's good to clean up litter in the river. Aesthetically, it improves things tremendously, but that vast amount of plastic that's in there is there, and it's too expensive to remove it. What we need to do is prevent any more from getting in. Plastic's a great material. I don't diss it, but it needs to stay where it's intended to stay, and that's not in the river. So we can prevent it from going in there through more robust recycling programs, public awareness campaigns about littering, that kind of thing, which has been around for a long time. That's the way to get at the plastic problem. A Tennessee bottle bill would be great, for example. People have been working on that for a while.
So I was thinking about, as I was looking at that question, it was obviously targeted to you, Martin, but I'm curious generally, how much data is there publicly available about biodiversity? Are there things, are there data sources that you all work with communities or that help communities interpret? Or is it really something that's more of the purview of people who are kind of more specifically engaged in the field science or the studies, or maybe the conservation efforts?
So I want to say the information about microplastics is available through scholarly articles. One would have to look there, and there are some that summarize those, and so you can get a picture of that through literature searches and that kind of thing. But as it goes to biodiversity, I will defer over to the biologist.
So the Tennessee Aquarium has a freshwater information network, and there we highlight the 400 species of fishes in the Cumberland River, Tennessee River, and Mobile Basin. We have a glitch right now with our maps that we're working on it, but it's got a picture of the fish. People can report photos of fishes, and we verify them and put the dot on the map. It just gives you an idea of just the vast diversity we have in these three main rivers. You get to see pictures of the fish, where they're found. You can put in your address and zoom in to see what you find. You get lists of which species are in a watershed, and then there's a little blurb about each species. We're going to try to update that and improve it here in the next month or two. There's a lot of very sciencey databases like FishNet2 that you can download a file of all the museum records of a certain species of fish. But once again, scientists usually just use those. There's names and there's changes in the scientific names of fishes that happen all the time. And unless you have a deep knowledge of that, it's a pretty tall task for the public. That's why we have the Freshwater Information Network.
Yeah, and there are a couple of more general public data sources. North American Native Fishes Association maintains a database that you can search by watershed. They're mainly hobbyists, which has been used as a pejorative in the scientific community, but it isn't. These folks do some amazing science. Organizations like NatureServe, which is a national and international data network, you can find out about what's in the general area. They don't give out specific information, but there are publicly available sources out there.
When we were getting ready for the briefing today, we were talking a little bit about how behind Bernie is the main trunk or the main stem of the Tennessee River, and that kind of goes through the 4 states. But you all were describing to me that, in fact, the watershed's quite a lot larger than that, and that what happens in the main part of the Tennessee River is impacted pretty heavily by what happens in the tributaries and the smaller bodies of water. So I wanted to give you all an opportunity. We haven't talked as much about the tributaries. We talked about the Ohio, but I think the Ohio would probably object to being called a tributary of the Tennessee. But I want to give you all an opportunity to describe a little bit more broadly in the watershed what's happening in some of the tributaries that you think is notable, that you would say is notable. And maybe, Bo, maybe we should start with you, and then we can go to Martin and to Bernie.
Sure, and we'd mentioned before that the main stem is a pretty altered ecosystem. There are a series of 9 dams that TVA and the Corps of Engineers constructed beginning in 33 along the river. So most of the river, main stem of the Tennessee River, is either reservoir, a tailwater of a reservoir, or otherwise fairly substantially altered from what the natural Tennessee River was. So the natural habitats remain in these tributary streams. Duck River, Elk River have hundreds of miles of relatively unimpacted river for these animals to live in. So the biodiversity remains on the edges, on the periphery of the main stem. So that's where we do most of our work. And in fact, a lot of conservation fisheries work restoring fish populations is because the fish can't get there on their own. Abrams Creek and Citico Creek are only separated by a couple of miles of river. The fish could swim there, except Chilhowie Dam is in between the two. So the original project we worked with was because of a barrier in the river. So a lot of the work that we do is necessarily in these tributary streams.
And Martin?
Yeah, I always tell my students, the character of a river is given to it by everything that happens in the watershed. And so for the Tennessee River, I'm keenly interested in those tributary portions that drain the part of the watershed that go through urban areas, because that's where apparently most of the microplastics are coming from, and a lot of the other pollutants. But one has to look at everything in the watershed, the forest cover type. As Bernie said, the geology is absolutely key there, but the human influence, the farming and that kind of thing. But for me, in my research, it's the urban area. So looking at Chattanooga Creek coming through Chattanooga, Third Creek in Knoxville, Mill Creek in Nashville, which goes into Cumberland River, of course. But when you look at what's coming down those tributaries in terms of pollutants and microplastics, it's very eye-opening and very informative.
Our regional conservation partnership program we have with NRCS, it's titled Ridges to Rivers, because everything that happens up on the ridges ends up in the rivers. And we have a new gallery in the Tennessee Aquarium and River Journey with the same name, just emphasizing that everything that happens in a watershed ends up in our small creeks and eventually the main stem of the Tennessee. Bo alluded to this, but historically, different tributaries to the Tennessee, the fish would get out in the main stem and they'd swim around, and you'd have gene flow, genetic exchange between these tributaries. Now there's a big reservoir, which is a desert to most stream fishes, and they don't have that gene flow. So the genetic diversity in a lot of these smaller tributaries are getting less and less. And the advantage of having genetic diversity in the population, you can better withstand disease, drought, climate change, any weird thing that comes along, which unfortunately are becoming less weird and more standard. And so as you lose that genetic diversity, that population is at higher and higher risk of blinking out.
So we're doing a whole bunch of these briefings. I mentioned that in the intro. We did the Mississippi River. We've got Tennessee River today. We're looking at the Columbia River in January, and then we've got a whole bunch more over the first couple months of next year. So for folks watching today on Capitol Hill, and they're like, "Oh, this is interesting," but my boss doesn't represent a district in the Tennessee River watershed. Are there things, and again, we can open this up. Maybe Bernie, maybe we'll start with you, and then we'll go the reverse, or maybe we'll go, I don't know. We'll figure it out. Are there things that are there lessons that you've learned over the years about these issues in the Tennessee River that you think apply more apply more broadly to other watersheds in other parts of the country, of rivers that might face similar challenges, or maybe that don't face similar, or that face different challenges, but maybe some of these lessons would still apply?
First of all, you have to have the public behind you to be able to make serious inroads into any issues you're having. And whether that's through social media, education in brick and mortar things like the Tennessee Aquarium, down at our school systems, but we've just got to let people know about the underwater rainforest they may have right in their backyard across the country. And then number two is partnerships are the key. I mean, Conservation Fisheries Incorporated, they have, I don't know what, 12 people that work there. The Conservation Institute here at the Tennessee Aquarium, we've got 8 full-time staff. We cannot do this alone. We have to build these huge partnerships to tackle these issues.
Yeah, no, I agree, Bernie. And sometimes that constituent you need to find is the property owner where you're working. We've had some amazing results from just educating the farmer about the fish that are in the stream. And we find out later that farmer's a county commissioner and he talked to the other county commissioners. So one of the things that we always do is speak to anyone that comes up and asks what we're doing and give them the full story, because you never know who you're talking to. And you might hit on that one key influential person that lives along that stream just by telling them what you're doing.
Martin?
Yeah, rivers across the United States can be quite different, but there are some common factors. One is that people are always drawn to rivers. They love to be around water. And the problems that you see in one river basin in one part of the U.S. tend to be very similar to from ones than the other. So if I had to pick a river that was most different from the Tennessee, it might be the Los Angeles River, which is mostly in a concrete ditch going through downtown LA. Doesn't start off that way. But, when we look at water quality there, we're looking at the same water quality parameters we look at in the Tennessee River. And people are trying to green the riparian zones there, the banks and so forth, and restore those in the same way that they would do that in other river systems.
Great. So we have time for two quick ones. This one's come in, and it has to do with significant gaps in knowledge. And so I'm curious if there are research gaps or gaps in knowledge that you all sort of see as critical in the next couple of years, let's say, that would, if you could fill these gaps, would really, really advance your efforts. And I'll open it up to the group if anyone has any comments there.
Well, Bo can attest to this, but we don't know the just general life history of most of our species of freshwater animals. We don't know when they spawn, how many eggs they lay, how long they live. We don't know any of this. And a lot of these models to try to determine how a species or a population or an ecosystem are going to do in the future with different scenarios, you need all this information, and it lacks for almost everything. So, and that isn't the sexy science, because people have been doing life histories of aquatic animals for 150 years. And it's something that's hard to get funded, but we desperately need.
Okay.
Not only the basic life history, but what they're sensitive to. I mean, the sensitivity of those blue shiners to chlorine was kind of a surprise. At levels that don't affect any other fish, 100% mortality of the fry in that fish. So there are a lot of biological interactions and chemical interactions that are just simply unknown out there. We haven't even started with mussels and snails and crayfish and salamanders.
Yeah, there are a lot of things about pollutants that we don't know yet. Microplastics, a lot of what I told you is anecdotal. I think most of them are coming from litter in urban areas. I don't know that for sure. Nobody's ever quantified that satisfactorily. I wouldn't call microplastics emerging contaminants anymore, but we're still sort of at the frontier of a lot of what we know. The same with PFAS chemicals, right? And I'd like to know what the impact on the health of aquatic organisms is, and humans especially, of microplastics. We don't know all that either. So I hope the biologists will get a better handle on that soon.
Thank you. So our last question, we often ask, because we have a lot of federal agency folks and especially congressional staff in our online audience. And so a lot of times we'll ask, what's the one takeaway you would like to take from our briefing? But since you've all, we've talked about a lot of species. We don't usually talk about this many species in EESI briefings. But since we've talked a lot of species, I'd like to maybe do a lightning round and give you each an opportunity to identify maybe favorite species or a particular species that if you could encourage a congressional staff person to go down a Wikipedia wormhole this afternoon and learn about, that would help them understand your work and the need for federal engagement in river conservation, what would be your nominee?
Can I start?
Yes.
Because I'm not a biologist, so I can't bring up a fancy fish. But how about Homo sapiens, humans?
Yeah.
May not be my favorite species. I don't know. Maybe it is. But let's start there. The water quality affects human life and human health. Microplastics, PFAS, all those chemicals that I mentioned, that needs lots of attention. How do we reduce those concentrations in our river systems that are, in very many cases, source of our drinking water?
Good answer. Bo, Bernie, one species. Oops.
Can I take the snail darter as my example? The probably infamous snail darter versus TVA lawsuit. It caused a federal agency a lot of angst back in the 1970s. A lot of people rallied to protect that animal, and TVA rallied to protect the animal. I have to credit the work that they did. In 2022, the snail darter had recovered to the point that it was removed from the endangered species list. So, and that was not through a lot of direct human intervention. The direct intervention was in the 80s. What changed were implementation of the clean water laws, TVA's changes to their operation, municipalities cleaning up wastewater. The river got better and the fish recovered in large part on its own after some initial concern. So if we fix the environment to the point that it sustains these animals and us, they can come back on their own in some cases. So that's a really fascinating story for me. That's what got me started in the field, was following this as a weird 9-year-old in the city newspaper. That's my species.
I guess I would have to pick cave organisms. I'll go with the Alabama cavefish since it's the one I've been studying a long time, but about 40% of Tennesseans get their drinking water from wells, from groundwater. And it doesn't go through a fancy water treatment plant. I mean, it comes out of their tap and into their house. And the more we understand about these cave and spring species, and the better we can try to keep pollutants out of groundwater, the safer we're going to keep a huge portion of Tennesseans with their drinking water. And this hidden, unknown diversity underground, it is literally the last frontier. I discovered a new species of cave shrimp in Northwest Tennessee in a cave that someone had done a survey for their master's degree to get all the aquatic diversity. But I put a mask and snorkel on and snorkeled around and saw these little almost invisible cave shrimp. So it's just, they're amazing systems, no light, very little energy, long-lived species, no eyes, no color, but they are the true canaries in the coal mine for the drinking water of a huge portion of Americans.
And did you name this shrimp after you? Is it the Bernie shrimp?
No, I'm calling it Tuscumbia K shrimp because it's in the Tuscumbia limestone formation, once again, geology, but it hasn't been officially described yet because I'm an ichthyologist, a fish guy, not a shrimpologist, so it's not described yet.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. So Homo sapien, snail darter, and Alabama cavefish. So congressional staff, you have my permission to waste a couple hours this afternoon going down Wikipedia wormholes, learning about these species. And then, it sounds like fun, actually. I might do that as well. That was a really fun conversation. And Bernie and Martin and Bo, thank you very much for joining us today to talk all about the Tennessee River and all the great critters and other creatures and everything that live in it, and the people who live along it. Thank you so much. This was really, really fun. I'd like to remind everyone that all the presentation materials, including all the pictures of all the fishes and everything, all of the presentation materials are online at www.eesi.org. We just put the slide up with the survey. If you have any comments about the panel today or the discussion, or if you have ideas for future panels, let us know. We read every response. It means a lot when you take time to do that. Thanks to everyone who submitted questions. That was a really fun discussion. We don't always get this much time for questions, but it's always really fun when we do. I'd also like to thank everyone behind the scenes at EESI. Even more behind the scenes today because we're online. Thanks to Dan O, Omri, Allison, Anna, Molly, and Nicole for all of the hard work and all of our policy work, but bringing our briefings to our audiences. Thanks so much for all your help. We also have Josh and Alia, who are two of our fall interns, and they are big helps. So thank you very much for them. This is our first briefing since our third fall intern, Jemiah, left us. And so Jemiah, I fully expect that you're watching this online. And I just wanted to say we miss you. And we definitely miss you. And I think Josh and Alia miss you too. Thanks to Troy, our videographer, who makes everything look really nice. Today was going to be our last briefing of 2024, but then our Department of Energy friends called and we decided to host a bonus online briefing next Tuesday. And so, yep, that's right. We get an extra sugar plum for everyone's stockings just in time for the holiday season. The briefing will be about the just released Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy 2024 Investment Snapshot Report. We have an all-star panel lined up. No one will want to miss it. It's a great final briefing of the year. We're super excited about it. We always love working with DOE. Visit us online at www.eesi.org to RSVP. And remember, subscribe to Climate Change Solutions, which is our bi-weekly newsletter. And I think we only have one more issue before the end of the year. So again, thanks to everyone. Thanks to our tremendous panelists. We will wrap it up here. See everybody next Tuesday, hopefully, to learn about EERE and all the great work that DOE is doing. Until then, if you're in the DC area, stay dry because it is still really pouring out there. And if you're in the Tennessee River watershed, go learn about these cool species because I've really enjoyed hearing about them. So thanks, everyone. Hope you have a great afternoon.